Hi everyone, welcome to another week of practicing Stoicism. Believe it or not, we only have 3 more weeks, including this week. Today we're talking about remarks 46, 47, and 48, and they are continuing with the theme of how you, as somebody who's training to be a philosopher, should behave, especially when you're around people who maybe don't understand what philosophy is or who don't have an interest or commitment to living in the way that you're trying to live. Okay, in the first remark, the first thing that Epictetus says is just don't call yourself a philosopher. Don't draw attention to that. Don't talk, he says, much when you're among ordinary people about your philosophical principles. Um, Instead, just try to channel whatever it is you're committed to through your actions. So you can, if people pay attention to you, they might learn what you believe by how you act rather than by what you say. He gives the example of being at a dinner party. Instead of going on and on about what the appropriate manners are, he says just exhibit those manners through how you eat. Um, or maybe more seriously, um, he talks about the case of whether or not you care if people think of you as a philosopher, right? He mentions Socrates, one of our heroes, as an example of someone who sometimes people would go to ask him to introduce them to others. And Socrates was interested in talking with anybody and going to have philosophical discussions, and he didn't mind perhaps being overlooked or not being treated as a philosopher in quite the way that maybe he should have been. The other thing connected to that, Epictetus says, is look, if um, a certain philosophical topic comes up, it's best just to try to keep quiet. Why is that? Well, because there's a risk. Um, these are new ideas. We're trying to make changes. And they go against the grain of a lot of what people think. And it's not it can be fun and exciting and interesting to explore, but he's just saying, look, this is risky. You need to be careful about how you talk about these things. What might happen? He says you might spew up something that you haven't fully absorbed, right? You might, and that could disrupt your own progress. Okay. Um, One sign that you are making progress is if, say, you don't talk about these things, you don't say much. People are talking about some topic and you, for the most part, keep quiet. If people then conclude, oh, that guy doesn't really know what they're talking about, or that gal, maybe they think, oh, they're ignorant. If you know that and you aren't bothered, right? You don't, hey, wait a minute, I've read a lot of Seneca. What are you talking about? Like if you can kind of get to the point where that isn't how you react, that's actually, he says, a good sign. That means you are making some progress. And then he finishes with this remark with a nice image. He compares us to sheep. How is it that sheep show that they're making progress, that they've accomplished something? He says, look, if they eat a bunch of stuff, they don't go to the shepherd and then regurgitate up their food and say, look how much I ate. No, they digest the food, right, inside their bodies, and that allows them to produce wool and milk, right? So same kind of thing. He says, in your case, if there are philosophical principles that you're trying to master, and let's suppose you have mastered them, you don't talk about them. Instead, you let them sit, you absorb them, they become second nature. And then, and only then, do you show that through your actions, right? So that's the key, like less talk, more action. Okay, the second remark is remark 47. And this is a case where the focus shifts a little bit. So in remark 46, Epictetus is talking about the risk of discussing things before they have taken root, before they have become second nature. Here he talks about things that maybe you have achieved. He's talking about the body in particular. He says, when you have accustomed your body to a frugal regime, don't put airs on about it. Don't like kind of draw attention to yourself. Don't brag about it. Right? Or if it comes to what you drink, suppose you have been practicing successfully drinking only water. Well, don't broadcast that. Like, don't draw attention to yourself. Like, that's not why we're doing these things, right? We're adopting a simpler life, or we're trying to change the principles that we live by in order to improve our lives, in order to end up with better actions. So he says, so the key here is, if you're doing these things, for example, more generally, if you're doing endurance training, he says you should do it for yourself, okay? Not to sort of create a spectacle, not for the world to see. So don't go out embracing statues, as he said. This is something that Diogenes used to do, the cynic, who had a slightly different mission. Remember, he was somebody that Epictetus admired greatly, but he also thought that a cynic was a special kind of philosopher, not just somebody who was trying to shape and form their own character to be the best kind of person they could, but that somebody who actually had been sent on a mission. A little bit like Socrates, right? When Socrates describes himself as a gadfly, he is somebody who is, in effect, embracing statues, going out and showing what he's capable of talking with people, maybe annoying them. That's not going to be a typical philosopher necessarily, a typical philosophy student. That's going to be somebody who has this extra God-given task that they are supposed to be awakening a people or a group. In the case of us, more humble individuals, he says, look, you can train, you can maybe limit how much water you drink, or put a little bit of water and spit it out, but then don't tell anybody about it. Just keep it to yourself. Okay, and then finally, the last remark, 48, it's one of my favorites. It's great. He returns to a topic that he had raised all the way back in remark number 1, right? The first remark of the handbook, where he contrasts a couple of types of life. The ordinary person and the philosopher or philosophy student, like the one who loves wisdom and is trying to change how they live. He says, an ordinary person never looks for help or for harm from themselves, right? They always are looking outside of themselves. So if anything happens, right, you need to help yourself, you think you've been hurt, you locate it outside of yourself. The shift, the philosophical life is to turn that inwards, right? So he says the stance and the hallmark of a philosopher is only looking for help and harm from themselves, right? Inwardly. That's where we look. And you might say the difference between a philosopher and the sage is that the philosopher is somebody maybe who doesn't always succeed in this, right? The sage is the one who's perfected this activity. The sage is the one who knows, right, that help and harm only come from within, and who's wise, so they only do good things. So there is no harm that comes to them. The philosopher maybe screws up a little bit, hasn't yet perfected things. And so as a part of trying to make progress, they're going to continue in a variety of training exercises, right? So, and there are some signs of these things that Epictetus discusses, right? So he says the signs of a person making progress are going to be these things. When it comes to others, they're not going to criticize anyone. They're not going to praise anyone. They're not going to blame anyone, accuse anyone. They're also, when speaking about themselves to others, they're not going to say anything that indicates that they think they're someone or that they know anything, right? So in all of these cases, there's an attempt to turn a little bit away from the way that we normally engage, the way that we normally employ various value terms. We're used to criticizing and blaming and judging and all these sorts of things. And the idea, as part of your training, as part of making progress, you're going to try to suspend all those things. You're just going to limit, right, finding good and bad to inside yourself. And you're not going to say much about yourself. If you find some good in there, you can be happy to yourself, but you're not going to be talking about it a whole lot with others. Okay? Now, he also says, if you are frustrated or impeded, you will accuse yourself, right? If you're complimented by someone else, you'll kind of laugh quietly to yourself. You won't take yourself too seriously, right? These things may happen as well. If you're criticized, you won't defend yourself. So we're going to sort of stop. We're going to try to stop criticizing, judging, evaluating others. We're going to stop defending ourselves when others do those kinds of things towards us. We're not going to take too seriously the praise. We're not going to take personally the criticism. All of these things are going to, in effect, be suspended, at least for a time. I mean, that'll be a sort of a part of how we're approaching things. Okay, and he compares the condition of the philosopher or of the philosophy student to a patient. Okay, so this is this analogy with medicine, right? We're somebody who is recovering. We're not fully healthy, right? The sage is fully healthy, but we are not fully healthy. So we need to be careful. Just like those risks that Epictetus, had talked about in Remark 46, right? We need to be careful about the way we go about things, right? He says, go around like a patient, taking care not to injure any of your recovering limbs before they are fully firm. So here, of course, we're not talking about physical limbs. We're talking about our soul, our mind, our character, right? We need to be gentle with ourselves and go about carefully. And how we will do this, right? How we will sort of, at least for a time, suspend these practices of judging others and criticizing others and responding to the criticisms of others is, he says, by first banishing desire, right? And we saw this. This was something that he had said again in Remark 1, that like this is how you have to go about doing this if you want to make progress. So we've set aside strongly wanting things. And also he says we will have transferred our aversions, our strong dislikes, to the naturally disagreeable things that are up to us. So we sort of try to assign any strong aversions we might have and only to things where we are going wrong, where we are making bad choices, where we're doing bad things, right? Otherwise, we'll try to be more kind of relaxed about how we go about things, the choices we make, the plans we make, how we just sort of carry ourselves. We're a patient. You're walking gingerly. You're not sort of too attached to things. You're sort of going about your business, okay? You're not going to care how you strike others. If you appear simple-minded or ignorant, in this case, as he says, you won't care. And again, that was the sort of thing that he suggested back in 46. If you don't mind if people think you don't really have a clue, then it shows you are making progress, right? Because it's not about what other people think about you. It's about your own understanding and how your life is actually going, right? And then he closes, the final image is a little different. I mean, he shifts from sort of thinking of you as a patient or describing you as a patient to describing you as somebody who nevertheless might be in danger of being attacked. But by who? By yourself, by the older version of yourself, by your older values, which are still there in pieces, right? Remember, this is something Farnsworth talked about, how sometimes even though our considered judgment is one thing, we still feel something else, which suggests that we still have an underlying opinion that these things are bad for us or that these things are good for us. This is a case where he says what you need to learn to do, in addition to sort of treating yourself gently as a patient, is to be alert, right? To be aware that there are parts of you that may spring unexpected and sort of, like an enemy. So treat yourself, as that older version of yourself, that part of you, as possibly plotting an attack. So you got to be always alert, right? You're caring for yourself and you're on the alert for things that could hurt you, right? That could be other people talking and trying to get you to talk about things before you've absorbed and digested them. But it could also be your own older beliefs that you haven't yet changed as adequately and as well as you're hoping to. So that's good advice, I think. All right, that's it for this week. I will see you next week and then only 1 week beyond Alas. Okay, see you then.